She was 23 years old, standing on the edge of the biggest year of her life. A Grammy on her shelf. A crossover album about to introduce her to the entire English-speaking world. And a woman she trusted like family was quietly planning to end it all. 30 years later, that same woman wants to talk. She's calling it a documentary. She's calling it the truth. Selena's family is calling it something else entirely, a cash grab dressed up as a confession. Before we get into what Yolanda Saldívar is saying now, you need to understand who Selena Quintanilla really was, how a devoted fan became her killer, and why this story still refuses to stay buried. Stick around because the ending of this one still hasn't been written. Selena Quintanilla entered the world on April 16, 1971, in the small town of Lake Jackson, Texas. She was the baby of the family, born to Marcela, a woman of Cherokee heritage, and Abraham Quintanilla Jr., a Mexican-American man who'd once chased his own music career and knew exactly what it took to build one. Here's a strange little footnote. The doctor who delivered her that day would go on to become a U.S. congressman. Small towns produce strange coincidences like that. The Quintanillas were Jehovah's Witnesses, and from the moment Abraham noticed his youngest daughter could actually sing, really sing, at just 6 years old, he became obsessed with turning that gift into something real. He'd later tell People magazine that her pitch and timing were flawless even as a small child, like she'd been born already knowing how to perform. In 1980, hoping to give his kids a stage, Abraham opened a Tex-Mex restaurant called Papagayos in Lake Jackson. Selena and her older siblings, Abraham 3 on bass, Suzette on drums, would perform for the dinner crowd. It was a sweet little dream. It lasted about a year. The early 80s oil crash hit Texas hard, and Papagayos went down with it. The family filed for bankruptcy. They lost their house. It's the kind of gut punch that ends most people's ambitions. Instead, it relocated them to Corpus Christi, and it hardened Abraham's resolve. He became the full-time manager of his children's band, now called Selena y Los Dinos, and he put them to work anywhere that would have them. Street corners, weddings, quinceañeras, county fairs. Whatever paid. The pace was brutal for a child. Selena's school attendance suffered so badly that Abraham eventually pulled her out entirely in 8th grade. One of her teachers, a woman named Marilyn Greer, was alarmed enough to threaten reporting the family to Texas education authorities, worried about how exhausted and overworked the little girl seemed. Abraham brushed her off. Other teachers noticed the same thing, a kid running on fumes, but the machine kept moving. Selena eventually finished her diploma through a correspondence school in Chicago at 17, and even got accepted into college, though the touring life never really allowed for a conventional education. The family bought and gutted an old bus nicknamed Big Bertha, and turned it into their rolling home. Those early tour years were lean. Sometimes the Quintanillas performed just to eat, barely scraping together gas money for the next town. In 1984, 13-year-old Selena cut her first album for Freddie Records. She wanted to sing in English. Her father had other plans. He pushed her toward Tejano music, a genre dominated by men sung in Spanish, blending polka, jazz and country influences brought over by German immigrant communities in Texas generations earlier. There was just one problem. Selena barely spoke Spanish. She had to learn her own lyrics phonetically, sound by sound, with her father coaching her through every syllable. It worked. She started appearing regularly on the Johnny Canales Show, a Spanish-language variety program that became her launching pad. Tejano promoter Rudy Trevino spotted her talent and helped push her forward, and in 1987 she won Female Vocalist of the Year at the Tejano Music Awards, a title she'd defend for 9 straight years. Industry insiders kept telling Abraham the same thing. A woman couldn't make it in this genre. He ignored every one of them. By 1988, Selena had 5 more records out. Her husband Chris Perez later wrote in his memoir that fans didn't just tolerate her. They adored everything about her, her looks, her presence, the way she carried herself on stage. And in 1994, it all crystallized. Her live album earned her a Grammy for Best Mexican-American Album. She was 23 at the absolute peak of her powers. She had no idea how little time she had left. Yolanda Saldívar wasn't always a fan. In fact, when she first heard of Selena, she resented her. Selena had beaten out some of Saldívar's favorite Tejano acts for awards Saldívar felt they deserved. That changed in 1991. Saldívar took her niece to see Selena perform live, and something shifted. She was captivated by the energy, the stage presence, one song in particular that stuck with her. The next day she went looking for merchandise to commemorate the night and came up empty-handed. Frustrated, she decided to solve the problem herself. She'd start a Selena fan club. She pursued Abraham relentlessly until he agreed to sit down with her, and eventually he gave the club his blessing. By June 1991, Yolanda Saldívar was officially the founding president of Selena's San Antonio fan club, responsible for member perks and collecting the $22 membership fee. For a while it looked like a genuine win-win. Members got t-shirts, newsletters, concert alerts, occasional access to Selena and the band. Profits from the club went to charity. Selena herself didn't actually meet Saldívar face-to-face until December of that year. Up until then, Selena's sister Suzette handled the relationship. But once they did meet, something clicked between them. The Quintanillas began to see Yolanda as trustworthy, even family-adjacent. By 1994, Saldívar had grown the fan club to more than 8,000 members. A television host who covered the story later described her as possibly the most capable assistant Selena had ever had. Saldívar leaned all the way in. She quit her nursing job entirely, taking a pay cut, just to run the fan club full-time. She wanted to be indispensable. And she was becoming exactly that. That same year, Selena opened 2 boutiques. One in Corpus Christi, one in San Antonio, each with an attached beauty salon. Between touring and recording, the family simply didn't have the bandwidth to manage retail operations, and Saldívar's track record with the fan club made her the obvious pick. In January 1994, she took over as boutique manager. By September, Selena had also made her San Antonio agent. Saldívar packed up and moved cities to stay close to her. Abraham had reservations from the start. Something about her never quite sat right with him, but nothing concrete ever surfaced, so the family let it go. And Saldívar's authority kept expanding. She could write and cash checks. She had access to bank accounts for both the fan club and the boutiques. She was issued a company credit card for business expenses. That card started paying for things that had nothing to do with business. Luxury car rentals, expensive dinners, a couple of personal cell phones. It didn't take long for the complaints to start. Boutique staff noticed a pattern. Saldívar was warm and pleasant whenever Selena was in the room, and a completely different person the second she left. By the end of 1994, the boutiques were behind on payments they shouldn't have struggled to make. Staffing had collapsed from 38 employees down to 14, largely because Saldívar had been firing anyone she personally disliked. Worried employees eventually brought their concerns straight to Selena. She didn't want to hear it. The idea that her friend could be working against her felt impossible. Staff described Saldívar to others as erratic and two-faced, and eventually took their worries to Abraham directly. He warned his daughter that something was off, that Saldívar might not be who she seemed. Selena waved it away. That was just her dad being suspicious of everyone as usual. In January 1995, Selena's cousin Deborah Ramirez came aboard to help expand the boutique brand into Mexico. She lasted barely a week. The sales numbers didn't match the receipts. Items were unaccounted for. When Ramirez raised the discrepancies, Saldívar shut her down immediately and told her to stay in her lane. Tension was building on multiple fronts. Saldívar clashed hard with Martin Gomez, Selena's fashion designer, accusing him of mismanaging things behind the scenes. During fashion shows, she was accused of sabotaging some of his original pieces and stiffing vendors on payments. The two of them constantly ran to Selena to complain about each other. Saldívar reportedly went as far as secretly recording her conversations with Gomez, building a case to convince Selena he couldn't be trusted. Meanwhile, Saldívar kept making trips to Monterrey, Mexico, to oversee the opening of a new store location. Workers at the factory there later described her as intimidating, demanding loyalty from the seamstresses or telling them to walk. And through all of this, Saldívar's devotion to Selena had taken on an intensity that people around her found unsettling. Her bedroom was practically a shrine: posters, candles, a personal library of Selena footage she'd show off to guests. A 1995 newspaper piece on her described the attachment as bordering on obsessive. Former co-workers say she talked openly about wanting to be Selena, not just work for her. One anonymous employee described her as deeply possessive of the relationship, actively working to isolate Selena from other staff under the excuse of shielding her from boutique drama. Saldívar had keys to Selena's house. She traveled with her constantly. She had, in every practical sense, embedded herself into Selena's daily life. Then a man named Ricardo Martinez entered the picture. A Monterrey-based physician, he approached Selena in September 1994 about helping grow her business in Mexico and quickly became a trusted advisor. Though her own family mostly wrote him off as just another starstruck fan who happened to be useful, Saldívar didn't see it that way. Martinez had started sending Selena flowers. He was taking up space that used to belong to her. The jealousy that followed would only accelerate the collapse that was already underway. Saldívar reportedly went out of her way to plant doubts about Martinez in Selena's mind, warning her that his motives might not be pure. It worked, at least partially. Selena began traveling to Monterrey more frequently, often traveling under her husband's surname to avoid being recognized. According to Martinez, he loaned her a significant sum of money during this stretch, since her finances were tighter than her public image suggested. Around the same time, Abraham started fielding a steady stream of angry calls and letters. Fan club members who'd paid their dues were saying their promised merchandise never arrived. At the boutiques, unpaid invoices were piling up with no clear explanation. Abraham started digging. What he found was damning. More than $60,000 embezzled through forged checks pulled from both the fan club and the boutique accounts. Then things got stranger. Saldívar's brother, Armando, called designer Martin Gomez out of nowhere and falsely accused him of stealing from the fan club, an accusation that eventually made its way back to Abraham through Selena's uncle. Armando initially seemed genuinely upset with his sister, but later appeared to regret stirring things up, without ever clearly explaining why he'd done it in the first place. When a Spanish-language news program later interviewed him about it, his answers didn't add up. On March 9, 1995, Abraham called Selena and Suzette into a meeting to confront Saldívar directly, evidence in hand. Her reaction, as Abraham described it later, swung between total silence, sudden emotional outbursts and moments of eerie calm. Her explanation was that fans were simply trying to scam free merchandise. It fell apart almost immediately. The investigation revealed the fan club's bank account had actually been opened under her sister Maria Elida's name, not her own. When pressed on why, she claimed the bank had refused to let her open it personally, but couldn't say why that would even be true. Abraham walked out of that meeting and banned her from any further contact with his daughter. Selena, though, wasn't ready to sever things completely. She still believed Saldívar's cooperation was necessary to keep the Mexico expansion alive and to help untangle the financial paperwork. So, against her father's instincts, Saldívar technically stayed on payroll while the family tried to recover what records they could. Then Abraham found something worse. The forged checks bore a signature that closely resembled Saldívar's own handwriting. It looked increasingly like she hadn't just misplaced funds, she'd been forging checks and pocketing the cash directly. When Abraham went looking for the fan club's bank statements to confirm it, they'd vanished. In their place he found a letter supposedly written by Maria Elida, claiming the account had been shut down over a disputed $3,000 deposit tied to a fan named Yvonne Perales, a woman who had allegedly disappeared with the money and couldn't be tracked down. Abraham didn't buy a word of it. Nobody at the fan club had ever laid eyes on this Yvonne Perales. When he confronted Saldívar, her story fell apart under basic questioning. To him it was obvious, Perales didn't exist. She was a fictional scapegoat, invented to cover a trail that led straight back to Saldívar. The day after the ban, Abraham physically escorted Saldívar out of the family's production offices. That same day, a heated phone call erupted between Selena, Chris Perez, and Saldívar over the missing merchandise and the excuses that came with it. According to Abraham's later account, what followed wasn't just financial fallout, it was a string of failed attempts on Selena's life. On March 10, Selena formally stripped Saldívar of her banking access and removed her as fan club president. The very next day, Saldívar walked into a gun shop and shooting range in San Antonio and purchased a Taurus .38 caliber revolver loaded with hollow point ammunition, later claiming she needed it for protection from a threatening patient's family, a leftover story from her nursing days. On March 13, she met with a lawyer to draft a resignation letter, a move Abraham later suspected wasn't as innocent as it appeared. That same day, while Selena was away in Miami, Saldívar drove to Corpus Christi and checked into the Sand and Sea Motel. Abraham would come to believe this was the first real attempt to kill his daughter. When Selena got back to Corpus Christi on March 14, Saldívar arranged a meeting, steering her toward a parking lot roughly 25 miles outside the city. Selena showed up and, wanting to smooth things over, reassured Saldívar that she could still manage the Mexico operations and that they'd sort out the paperwork together. That reassurance, according to both Saldívar and Chris Perez, seemed to defuse whatever Saldívar had been planning. The following day, Saldívar returned the gun to the store, claiming her father had given her a smaller .22 caliber pistol instead. But it wasn't over. While in Mexico, Saldívar allegedly took a perfume sample and more bank records that didn't belong to her. She then joined Selena on a trip to Tennessee, where Selena was wrapping up a track for her upcoming English-language crossover album. During the trip, Selena noticed paperwork was missing again and asked for it back once they returned to Texas. On March 27, Saldívar bought the same gun back and tried to arrange a private motel meeting. This time, word of Selena's arrival spread and fans swarmed the location before anything could happen. Abraham later theorized that the unplanned crowd of witnesses accidentally saved his daughter's life that day. He believed a third attempt unfolded during Saldívar's next Monterrey trip in late March. On March 29, she made a series of panicked calls to Ricardo Martinez claiming she'd been attacked. The next day another call came through, this time with the sound of a struggle audible in the background. Alarmed, Martinez sent someone to check on her hotel room. She'd already left. On March 30, she resurfaced in Corpus Christi and checked into a Days Inn. She told Selena the same story, that she'd been assaulted, which Abraham would later view as yet another manufactured excuse to get Selena alone. This time, Chris Perez insisted on driving Selena over, though he waited outside in the truck while Selena went in by herself. On the drive home, Selena realized the bank records she'd been promised again weren't the right ones. Not long after, Saldívar called again, this time claiming she was bleeding and needed emergency medical help. Abraham believed this was simply another attempt to draw Selena back to that motel room alone. Perez urged her not to go. She agreed with him, in the moment. The next morning, without telling her husband, she went anyway. Selena arrived alone at the Days Inn, hoping to finally collect the paperwork Saldívar had been withholding for weeks. Once again, Saldívar claimed she'd been assaulted during her Mexico trip. Concerned for her, Selena drove her to a nearby hospital that same morning. The visit went nowhere. Staff explained they couldn't conduct a full examination. Saldívar wasn't a local resident, and the alleged incident had supposedly happened outside their jurisdiction anyway. A nurse on duty later recalled Selena's visible frustration as Saldívar's account of the assault kept shifting and contradicting itself. They left the hospital and returned to room 158 at the Days Inn. An argument broke out. A maintenance worker at the motel would later describe hearing a loud, sharp noise, something like a tire blowing out. Moments later, he saw a young woman in a tracksuit sprinting and screaming, chased by another woman holding a gun. The pursuit ended before reaching the lobby, and the armed woman turned back toward her room. Selena kept moving. She made it to the motel lobby and collapsed, bleeding from a gunshot wound to her back, calling out for help. In her final moments, she managed to identify who had shot her. The motel sales manager Ruben de Leon was there. He later recalled her looking at him and saying a single name, Yolanda Saldívar, before her eyes lost focus. She was rushed to the hospital and declared brain dead on arrival. Selena Quintanilla died just weeks shy of her 24th birthday. Saldívar didn't run far. She barricaded herself in her car in the motel parking lot with the gun, sparking a 9-hour standoff with police negotiators. An assistant police chief who was present later said she appeared remorseful throughout, repeatedly calling family members during the standoff. Eventually she surrendered. She was later convicted and sentenced to life in prison, with her first chance at parole set for 2025. To this day she maintains that Selena's death was never intentional, an accident, she said, born out of what she describes as misguided love. By the time she died, Selena had already built a fortune worth roughly $5 million in today's terms, an extraordinary achievement for someone barely into her 20s. Her third studio album, Entre a mi Mundo, moved over 2 million copies. Her crossover breakthrough, Amor Prohibido, cleared 1 million more. She wasn't just a Tejano star, she was pulling numbers that rivaled mainstream pop acts, all while working in a genre that industry insiders had once told her father would never accept a woman at the top. Beyond the music, she was building an empire, a cosmetics line, boutique fashion, endorsement deals, carving out a lane that plenty of celebrities would later follow. She was, by every measure, just getting started. Her posthumous English-language album, Dreaming of You, dropped months after her death and debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, proof that her reach extended far beyond the audience she'd already won over. A producer who worked with her shortly before she died told USA Today that he believed she was destined for global stardom, and that belief has only grown louder with time. Her story helped open doors for the generation of Latin artists that followed. Jennifer Lopez, who portrayed her in the acclaimed 1997 biopic, has said the role reshaped her entire career, pushing her deeper into the culture and story she was portraying, and even nudging her toward pursuing music herself. In 2017, more than 2 decades after her death, Selena received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. A Netflix series exploring her rise premiered a few years later, with actress Christian Serratos recreating her iconic purple stage jumpsuit from her final televised performance. Her husband, Chris Perez, has spoken about still stumbling across old fan photos that make the years feel like they vanished in an instant. But he's also said he remains grateful for every moment he got to share with her, the band, and the fans who never stopped showing up. Which brings us back to now. At 64 years old, nearly 30 years after pulling that trigger, Yolanda Saldívar is stepping back into the spotlight with a docuseries called Selena and Yolanda: Secrets Between Us. The timing isn't subtle, it's landing right as her parole hearing approaches, and that alone has set off alarm bells. Selena's family hasn't minced words. They see this as exploitation, plain and simple, a calculated attempt to profit off a tragedy they've spent 3 decades trying to heal from. They've rejected Saldívar's claims outright and made it clear they believe this project has far more to do with money than with truth. Saldívar's defense is that the public deserves to know what she calls the real story, that these are secrets worth telling. But here's the obvious question critics keep asking: why now? What new information could possibly emerge decades after a conviction that would change how anyone understands this case? Murder is murder. No documentary changes that math. To make things murkier, Saldívar's own family has said they plan to introduce new documents and recordings through the series, materials they claim shed light on previously hidden details. Which raises an even bigger red flag. If this evidence was so significant, why wasn't any of it presented at trial when it actually mattered? For most of Selena's fans and family, the verdict on this new project is already in: a misguided, self-serving attempt to rewrite a story that was never Saldívar's to rewrite in the first place. What do you think? Is there any version of this confession worth hearing, or is this just another chapter of exploitation added onto an already tragic story? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more real stories of trust broken, empires built and lost, and the people behind the headlines, subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.